It was a morning like any other in the quiet village of Tambara, where the sun bathed the mud-brick homes in golden light, and the rhythmic sounds of pounding millet filled the air. Amina, a widow in her early 30s, was busy tending to her small garden behind her house. Life had been far from easy since her husband, Idris, fell mysteriously ill just months ago. Though the pain of his passing still clung to her like a shadow, Amina found solace in her daily routine, determined to carry on for the sake of her young daughter, Zara. As she watered her plants, Zara's laughter echoed from the front yard, where she played with a neighbor's child. The sound brought a faint smile to Amina's face, a rare moment of light in her otherwise heavy world. She wiped her hands on her faded kitenge cloth and stood up, her back aching from the morning's work. That's when she heard it, the sound of hurried footsteps, urgent and heavy, growing louder as they approached her home. Before Amina could react, the village chief's son, Malik, stormed into her yard, his face twisted in anger and fear. "Amina," he shouted, his voice cutting through the morning calm like a knife. "Come out here. Now." Startled, Amina stepped forward, her heart pounding. Behind Malik, a small crowd had begun to gather, their faces a mix of confusion and suspicion. Zara clung to her mother's leg, her wide eyes reflecting the tension in the air. "What's going on, Malik?" Amina asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "It's Idris," Malik spat, pointing an accusatory finger at her. "We found evidence that you poisoned him." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Amina staggered back, her mind reeling. Poison? Idris? It was unthinkable. She shook her head, her voice trembling. "That's not true. I loved my husband. I would never." "Enough." Malik cut her off, his voice rising. "The elders have summoned you. There's no denying it now. We found traces of poison in his old medicine bottles." The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder. Amina's neighbors, people she had known for years, now looked at her with distrust. The weight of their stares felt like 1,000 stones pressing down on her. "But that doesn't make sense." Amina pleaded, her eyes darting from one face to another, searching for an ally. "You all know me. You know I wouldn't hurt anyone, least of all my husband." Malik scoffed, his arms crossed. "Tell it to the elders. But don't think for a second that we'll let you slip away. The punishment for murder is death, Amina." Panic surged through her. Zara clutched her even tighter, tears streaming down her small face. "Mama, what's happening?" the little girl whimpered. Amina knelt down, her hands trembling as she stroked her daughter's hair. "It's going to be okay, Zara," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. The villagers closed in, their voices growing louder, each accusation cutting deeper than the last. Amina felt trapped, the walls of her once safe home now seeming like a cage. Her thoughts raced. Who could have done this? Who would want to frame her, and why? Before she could find an answer, Malik grabbed her arm. "You're coming with us," he said, dragging her toward the village square. The walk felt like an eternity. Along the way, more villagers joined the growing mob, their curiosity quickly turning to judgment. By the time they reached the square, nearly the entire village had gathered. The elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions grim. Amina stood before them, her hands shaking, her voice caught in her throat. Zara was taken from her arms and led away by a neighbor, her cries piercing the air like shards of glass. Amina wanted to scream, to run, to fight back, but she knew that any resistance would only make her look guiltier. The chief elder, a man known for his stern demeanor, raised his hand, silencing the crowd. "Amina," he began, his voice heavy with authority, "you stand accused of poisoning your husband, Idris. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Amina opened her mouth, but no words came. The weight of the accusation, the sea of angry faces, and the thought of losing Zara forever threatened to crush her. Finally, she managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do it. I swear on my daughter's life, I am innocent." The elder's gaze didn't waver. "The evidence speaks otherwise. Until we have a proper trial, you will remain in custody. If you are found guilty, you know the penalty." The crowd erupted into shouts, some demanding justice, others whispering doubts about her innocence. Amina was dragged away, her heart pounding with fear and disbelief. As she was locked in a small hut at the edge of the village, Amina sat in the darkness, tears streaming down her face. She didn't just have to prove her innocence, she had to uncover the truth. And she had to do it quickly because in Tambara, once the mob decided your fate, there was little hope of escape. Amina sat in the dim, musty hut that served as her prison, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The accusations, the venom in Malik's voice, the way the crowd turned against her, it all felt surreal, like a terrible dream she couldn't wake up from. Through the small cracks in the wooden door, she could hear the murmurs of villagers outside. They were debating her fate, their words sharp and unforgiving. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. Her thoughts drifted to Zara, her precious daughter. Where was she now? Was she safe? The uncertainty gnawed at her, fueling the fire of desperation growing inside her. Amina's mind wandered back to the days before Idris's death. Their marriage had been far from perfect, but they had loved each other in their own way. Idris had been a proud man, often too stubborn to ask for help even when his health began to fail. For months, he had complained of stomach pains, but he dismissed Amina's pleas to see the village healer. "Just stress," he would say, brushing off her concerns. "The land is unforgiving this year. It's nothing a strong man like me can't handle." But the pains grew worse. Amina remembered the nights she sat by his side, holding his hand as he writhed in agony. She had begged him to take the herbal medicines the healer prescribed, but Idris had only taken them sporadically, insisting they were useless. On the morning he died, Idris had seemed no worse than usual. He had eaten breakfast, porridge and fried plantains, and then gone to lie down. When Amina went to check on him, he was already gone. The memory of finding his lifeless body still haunted her, and now the village had twisted that tragedy into a weapon against her. The elders had mentioned poison found in his medicine bottles. Amina replayed the details in her mind. Could someone have tampered with them? The thought chilled her. Who would go to such lengths to frame her? Her mind turned to her neighbors. There was Fatuma, the nosy woman next door, who had always resented Amina for being the daughter-in-law of Idris, a man who once held considerable influence in the village. Then there was Malik, the chief's son, who seemed all too eager to accuse her. Amina recalled the heated argument Idris had with Malik a month before his death over a disputed boundary between their farmlands. Malik had stormed away that day, vowing to settle the matter one way or another. The door creaked open, startling Amina from her thoughts. It was Fatuma, holding a bowl of food. Her face was a mask of feigned pity. "I brought you something to eat," she said, placing the bowl on the floor. "You'll need your strength for what's coming." Amina stared at her, trying to gauge her intentions. "Why are you here, Fatuma? Come to gloat?" Fatuma sighed, sitting down just outside the door. "Amina, you know how this village is. When people smell blood, they become wolves. If you're smart, you'll confess and beg for mercy. It's the only way you'll save your daughter." Amina's jaw tightened. "I didn't do it. And I won't admit to something I didn't do." Fatuma shrugged. "Suit yourself. But you know how these things end. They'll need someone to blame, and you're the easiest target." As Fatuma left, Amina's resolve hardened. If she didn't fight back, if she didn't uncover the truth, she would lose everything: her freedom, her daughter, her life. The next morning, the village square buzzed with activity as the elders prepared for her trial. Amina was led out of the hut, her wrists bound with coarse rope. The crowd parted as she was marched to the center, their whispers like the hiss of snakes. Zara stood with an elderly neighbor, her tear-streaked face breaking Amina's heart. The chief elder raised his hand for silence. "Amina," he began, "you stand accused of murdering your husband, Idris, by poisoning him. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Amina took a deep breath, her voice cleared despite the lump in her throat. "I loved my husband. I would never harm him. Someone else is responsible, and I intend to find out who." The crowd erupted in murmurs, some scoffing at her defiance, others intrigued by her determination. Malik stepped forward, holding up a small wooden box. "This was found in Idris's belongings," he announced. "It contains a substance the healer identified as poison." "And who had access to his belongings?" "His wife." Amina's stomach churned as Malik opened the box, revealing a pouch of white powder. She stared at it, her mind racing. She had never seen it before. "That's not mine," she said firmly, meeting Malik's gaze. "Someone put it there." Malik sneered. "Convenient excuse. But who else would have the motive?" A voice from the crowd interrupted. It was Musa, an elderly farmer known for his impartiality. "Why don't we ask the healer?" he suggested. "Let him tell us where this poison might have come from." The suggestion gained traction, and soon the healer, an old man named Juma, was summoned. He examined the powder closely, sniffing it and rubbing a small amount between his fingers. "This is no ordinary poison," Juma said gravely. "It's a rare extract from the kasha root, which grows only in the northern hills. Few people know how to prepare it." Amina's mind flashed to a memory, a conversation she had overheard between Malik and another villager about a hunting trip to the northern hills just weeks before Idris's death. "Malik," she said, her voice steady but loud enough for the crowd to hear, "didn't you recently return from the northern hills? How do we know this poison didn't come from you?" The crowd gasped, and Malik's face darkened. "You dare accuse me?" he growled. "This is just another desperate attempt to shift blame." But Amina saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. She knew she was onto something. The tension in the square crackled like a storm about to break. For the first time, doubt began to creep into the minds of the villagers. As the elders deliberated, Amina realized she had taken her first step toward uncovering the truth. But the battle was far from over. Someone in the village was hiding a dark secret, and she had to expose it before it was too late. The village square buzzed with tension as the elders whispered among themselves, deliberating over the sudden twist in the proceedings. Amina stood in the center, her wrists still bound, but for the first time since her nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Malik's reaction to her accusation had not gone unnoticed. She saw the subtle shift in the crowd, the murmurs of uncertainty, the flickers of doubt in their eyes. But doubt alone wouldn't save her. She needed proof. Amina clenched her fists, her mind racing. The mention of the kasha root poison from the northern hills had struck a chord with her. She remembered Idris telling her once about the dangers of the root during one of his rare storytelling moments, explaining how it was sometimes used by hunters to coat their arrows when tracking wild animals. It wasn't common knowledge, but someone like Malik, who often boasted of his hunting expeditions, would certainly know about it. The elders finally raised their hands for silence. The chief elder, his expression unreadable, addressed the crowd. "This accusation against Malik is serious, and we cannot ignore it. However, without evidence, it remains speculation. Amina, you claim your innocence, but the burden of proof is on you. Do you have anything else to say before we proceed?" Amina took a deep breath. "I need time," she said firmly. "If you truly seek justice, allow me to find the truth. Give me one day to prove that I was framed." The elder hesitated, but before he could respond, Malik stepped forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "One day? Why delay the inevitable? She's only trying to stall for time. What could she possibly uncover that we haven't already seen? Amina met his gaze, unflinching. If you're so certain of my guilt, Malik, what harm is there in giving me a chance? Or are you afraid of what I might find? The crowd murmured again, the challenge hanging heavily in the air. The elder raised his hand once more, silencing the villagers. Very well, he said after a long pause. You have until sunset tomorrow, Amina. If you fail to provide evidence of your innocence, the trial will proceed, and you will face the consequences. The crowd began to disperse, some muttering their disapproval, others intrigued by the unfolding drama. Amina was released from her bindings but kept under guard. As the villagers returned to their homes, she was escorted to her own, where she was allowed to stay under the watchful eye of 2 guards. Inside, Zara ran to her, throwing her arms around her mother's waist. Amina knelt, holding her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. Mama, Zara whispered, are they going to hurt you? No, my little one, Amina replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. I won't let them. We'll get through this together. As night fell, Amina began to formulate a plan. She needed allies, people who believed in her innocence or at least doubted Malik's motives. She thought of Musa, the elderly farmer who had spoken up earlier. He was known for his wisdom and fairness, and she decided to start with him. The guards reluctantly allowed her to visit Musa under strict supervision. She found him sitting by his fire, his weathered face illuminated by the flickering flames. He looked up as she approached, his eyes kind but cautious. Amina, he said, gesturing for her to sit. You've been through much today. What brings you here now? I need your help, Musa, she said, her voice earnest. You were the first to question Malik. You must see that something isn't right. I need to prove my innocence, but I can't do it alone. Musa nodded slowly. I've lived long enough to know that things are not always as they seem. Malik has always been ambitious, and I've seen how he covets power. But suspicion alone won't clear your name. What do you need from me? Information, Amina replied. Malik recently returned from the northern hills. Can you confirm if he brought anything unusual back with him? Supplies, plants, anything that could be connected to Kasha root? Musa thought for a moment. I do recall hearing him brag about his hunt last month. He mentioned bringing back something special, though he didn't say what. If it's Kasha root you're looking for, there's someone who might know more, the healer, Juma. He's the only one in the village who understands its properties. Amina thanked Musa and made her way to Juma's hut, the guards trailing behind her. The healer welcomed her cautiously, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Amina, he said, you're taking a great risk by coming here. What do you want? Answers, she said bluntly. You said the poison was Kasha root. How common is it for someone to know how to prepare it? Juma stroked his beard thoughtfully. Not common at all. It requires skill and knowledge, something only a hunter or an experienced herbalist would have. Why do you ask? Because Malik has that knowledge, Amina said, her voice trembling with conviction. He's the one who brought the Kasha root to the village. I need proof that he could have done this. Juma hesitated before nodding. There's one way. If the Kasha root was prepared recently, it would leave traces on the tools used, knives, grinding stones, even the storage containers. If Malik prepared the poison, those tools might still be in his possession. Amina's heart raced. This was her chance. She needed to search Malik's belongings, but how could she do so under the watchful eyes of the guards and the villagers? As she left Juma's hut, the beginnings of a plan took shape in her mind. She would need the help of someone who could move unnoticed, someone the villagers wouldn't suspect. Her thoughts turned to Fatuma. Despite their tense relationship, Fatuma had a knack for slipping through the cracks of village life, overhearing conversations and gathering information. When Amina approached Fatuma, the older woman raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You want me to help you? After all the times you've looked down on me?" "Fatuma, please," Amina said, her voice urgent. "I don't have time for old grudges. If I'm executed for a crime I didn't commit, it won't just be me who suffers. Zara will lose her mother. Do this for her, if not for me." Fatuma sighed, the mention of Zara softening her resolve. "Fine," she said. "But if I'm caught, you're on your own." That night, while the village slept, Fatuma crept into Malik's compound under the cover of darkness. She searched his storage hut, her heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. Finally, she found what she was looking for, a set of knives and a grinding stone, both coated with a faint, powdery residue. She wrapped them carefully in cloth and slipped out unnoticed. When she returned to Amina, the younger woman's eyes filled with gratitude and determination. With this evidence in hand, Amina knew she had a chance to turn the tide. But dawn was fast approaching, and the next day would bring the most dangerous confrontation of her life. The first light of dawn cast a pale glow over the village, rousing its inhabitants from their sleep. By mid-morning, the square was once again alive with murmurs and tense anticipation. The villagers gathered around the elder's platform, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Amina, standing in the center with her hands bound once more, felt the weight of their stares but kept her head high. Today, she would prove her innocence, or she would perish trying. Beside her, Fatuma clutched the bundle containing the knives and grinding stone, her normally sharp tongue uncharacteristically silent. Amina gave her a brief nod of gratitude. Whatever happened today, she owed this moment to Fatuma's risky intervention. The chief elder raised his hand for silence, his weathered face stern. "Amina, the day you requested has passed. What evidence have you brought to defend yourself against these charges?" Amina stepped forward, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I bring proof that someone else had the means and motive to harm my husband. Malik, the chief's son, has knowledge of the kasha root poison, and these tools," she gestured to the bundle, "were found in his possession, bearing traces of the poison used to kill Idris." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Fatuma unwrapped the bundle, revealing the knives and grinding stone. The elders leaned in to inspect the items, their faces darkening as they noted the faint residue. Malik, standing to the side, erupted with outrage. "This is absurd. How do we know those tools are mine? She could have planted them to frame me." Amina met his furious gaze with unwavering determination. "If these tools aren't yours, Malik, then you won't mind us searching your compound for more evidence. Or perhaps we should ask the villagers if anyone has seen you using them?" The crowd erupted into murmurs, some nodding in agreement. Malik's reputation as a hunter was well known, and it was no secret that he frequently boasted about his tools and techniques. His face flushed with anger, but a flicker of fear betrayed him. Before Malik could respond, Musa, the elderly farmer, stepped forward. "I've seen those knives before," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had lived through many seasons. "Malik, you used them during the last hunt, didn't you? You even showed them off, claiming they were specially sharpened for the trip." The crowd turned to Malik, their murmurs growing louder. The chief elder silenced them with a raised hand, his gaze fixed on his son. "Malik," he said, his tone grave, "is what Musa says true? Were these tools yours?" Malik hesitated, his eyes darting around as though searching for an escape. Finally, he snarled, "Yes, they're mine. But that doesn't prove anything. Just because I own those tools doesn't mean I used them to kill Idris." Amina took a step forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Malik, you knew about the kasha root. You had the tools, the knowledge, and the motive. Idris argued with you over the land dispute just weeks before his death. You swore you'd settle it one way or another. Isn't that true?" The villagers began whispering among themselves, their suspicion mounting. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions troubled. Malik's temper boiled over. "Enough of this," he shouted, pointing a finger at Amina. "She's just trying to save herself by dragging my name through the mud. I demand an end to this charade." The chief elder raised his hand again, silencing the uproar. "We will hear from the healer, Juma, one more time. If the residue on these tools matches the poison found in Idris's medicine, then we will have our answer." Juma was summoned to the square, his presence quieting the crowd. The elderly healer examined the tools closely, sniffing the residue and rubbing a small amount between his fingers. After a long moment, he nodded solemnly. "This residue is consistent with the kasha root extract I identified in Idris's medicine," Juma announced. "There is no doubt that these tools were used to prepare the poison." A hush fell over the square as the villagers absorbed this revelation. All eyes turned to Malik, whose face was a mask of fury and desperation. "This proves nothing." Malik spat, his voice trembling. "Anyone could have used my tools. This is a setup." The days following Malik's confession were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for Amina and her daughter Zara. The village, once so quick to judge and condemn her, now walked a fine line between guilt and gratitude. Some avoided her entirely, too ashamed to face the woman they had wronged, while others came bearing apologies, gifts of food, or quiet words of regret. Amina accepted their gestures with grace, but she couldn't forget how easily they had turned on her when she needed them most. Malik, stripped of his status and power, was confined to a small, windowless hut at the edge of the village as the elders deliberated his punishment. The villagers whispered about his fate, speculating whether he would be exiled, imprisoned, or worse. Amina tried not to concern herself with these discussions, focusing instead on reclaiming her life and providing stability for Zara. One morning, as Amina tended to her small garden, Zara ran up to her, clutching a torn piece of fabric she had found near the edge of the forest. "Mama, look! It has strange markings on it." Amina took the fabric, her brow furrowing as she examined it. The markings were faint but unmistakable, symbols used by the traveling merchants who occasionally passed through the region. Memories of Idris's trips to trade with these merchants surfaced in her mind, and an unsettling thought took root. What if there was more to Idris's death than Malik's jealousy over land? What if Malik hadn't acted alone? Later that day, Amina sought out Musa, the wise farmer who had been instrumental in her defense. She showed him the fabric and shared her concerns. Musa listened carefully, his face growing more serious with each passing moment. "You may be onto something," he said finally. "I remember Idris mentioning a deal he was working on with one of the merchants, a lucrative trade involving rare spices. He seemed excited but also wary. He said he didn't trust the man entirely but couldn't afford to pass up the opportunity." Amina's heart sank. Could Idris have been betrayed by someone outside the village? If so, how had Malik become involved? She decided she needed answers, and there was only one person who might have them, Malik himself. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in shadows, Amina approached the hut where Malik was being held. The guards hesitated but ultimately allowed her inside, recognizing her right to confront the man who had nearly destroyed her life. Malik sat on the floor, his once proud demeanor replaced by a hollow, defeated expression. When he saw Amina, his eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. "Tell me the truth," Amina demanded, her voice steady but cold. "Why did you kill Idris? Was it only about the land, or was there something more?" Malik scoffed, leaning back against the wall. "What does it matter now? My life is over, thanks to you." "It matters because Idris deserves the truth," Amina snapped. "If there's more to this than your petty jealousy, I will find out. So, you can either tell me now, or I'll dig until I uncover every dirty secret you've tried to hide." For a moment, Malik said nothing, his jaw tightening as he weighed his options. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine. You want the truth? It wasn't just about the land. Idris was about to make a deal with one of the merchants, an outsider named Asar. The deal would have made him one of the wealthiest men in the region. But Asar didn't want to share the profits, so he offered me a cut to get rid of Idris and make it look like an accident. He gave me the Kasha route and promised I'd never have to worry about money again. Amina's blood ran cold. You betrayed him for money? You killed my husband and left me to take the blame so you could line your pockets? I didn't think it would go this far. Malik protested, his voice rising. I thought it would end with Idris. I didn't expect you to fight back, to dig up the truth. Asar swore he'd cover for me, but as soon as things got messy, he disappeared. Amina's hands clenched into fists. The betrayal cut deeper than she had imagined. Not only had Malik destroyed her family, but he had also involved a stranger whose greed had led to this tragedy. She left the hut without another word, her mind racing with plans. The next day, Amina gathered the elders and shared what she had learned. They listened intently, their faces grim. The idea of an outsider orchestrating Idris's death was deeply troubling, not only for Amina but for the entire village. The elders agreed to send a group of men to track down Asar and bring him to justice. As the search party prepared to leave, Amina insisted on joining them. This is my fight as much as it is yours, she argued. I need to see this through, for Idris and for Zara. The journey was long and arduous, taking them through dense forests and across treacherous terrain. They followed the faint trail left by Asar, piecing together his movements from the accounts of other merchants and villagers they encountered along the way. After weeks of relentless pursuit, they finally found him in a bustling market town far from their village. Asar, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a cunning smile, was selling his wares as if nothing had happened. When confronted, his confident facade crumbled, and he tried to flee, but the group quickly apprehended him. Under pressure, Asar confessed to his role in Idris's murder, admitting that he had manipulated Malik with promises of wealth while planning to double-cross him all along. His greed and deceit had set the tragedy in motion, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Asar was brought back to the village to face justice alongside Malik. The elders convened a final council, and both men were sentenced to exile, a punishment that would strip them of their connections, their power, and their identities. For Amina, the conclusion of the ordeal brought a sense of closure but also a profound sadness. She had lost Idris, endured betrayal, and fought tirelessly to clear her name. Though justice had been served, the scars of the past would remain. In the weeks that followed, Amina began to rebuild her life, focusing on Zara and the future they could create together. The village, humbled by the events, came together to support her, offering their help and seeking her forgiveness. Standing on the hill overlooking her fields one evening, Amina felt a quiet resolve settle over her. Life would never be the same, but she had survived the storm. And in her survival, she had found strength she never knew she possessed. Months passed, and life in the village slowly returned to a fragile semblance of normalcy. Amina, though weary from the battles she had fought, dedicated herself to rebuilding her life and finding new purpose. Her days were consumed with tending the land she and Idris had cultivated together, ensuring that Zara had a safe and nurturing environment, and trying to stitch together the tattered fabric of her community. Yet, a lingering question haunted her: could the village truly heal from the betrayals and injustices it had endured? One crisp morning, as the first rays of sunlight bathed the village in gold, Amina stood outside her hut, watching Zara chase butterflies in the dew-covered grass. For a moment, a bittersweet peace washed over her. Idris's absence was a wound that would never fully heal, but Zara's laughter was a reminder that life, fragile as it was, continued. The villagers had not forgotten her ordeal, nor their role in it. They often sought her out, not only to offer their apologies but also to ask her advice. Amina had become a symbol of resilience, her story a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind judgment and the power of truth. Her presence at village gatherings now commanded respect, and her words carried weight. It was a stark contrast to the isolation she had endured not so long ago. One evening, as the village gathered around the communal fire for storytelling, the elders invited Amina to share a tale. At first, she hesitated, unsure of what to say. But as she looked around at the expectant faces, she realized she had a story that needed to be told, not just for her sake but for the entire community. She began with a deep breath, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. There was a time when I believed that justice would protect the innocent and that truth would always prevail. But life taught me that justice must be fought for, and truth often hides in the shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. As she recounted her journey, the false accusations, the betrayal, and her relentless pursuit of the truth, the villagers listened in rapt silence. She spoke of the fear and pain she had endured, the strength she had found within herself, and the allies who had helped her along the way. But she also acknowledged the lessons she had learned about forgiveness and the power of community. "I stand before you not as someone who has all the answers," she concluded, "but as someone who has lived through the darkest of nights and found her way back to the light. We must learn from what has happened here. We must choose compassion over suspicion, unity over division, and courage over fear." The villagers erupted into applause, their faces a mix of admiration and reflection. That night, Amina's story became more than just her own, it became a shared narrative, a chapter in the village's history that they could all learn from. In the weeks that followed, the village underwent a quiet transformation. The elders, moved by Amina's words, instituted new practices to ensure that justice was fair and thorough. Accusations were no longer accepted without evidence, and disputes were mediated with care and empathy. The villagers themselves became more mindful of their actions and words, striving to create an environment where trust and understanding could flourish. Amina, too, found herself changing. The bitterness that had once threatened to consume her began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. She started teaching the village children, sharing stories of courage, wisdom, and resilience. Zara, ever her mother's shadow, often joined in, her laughter a bright beacon of hope for everyone who heard it. One day, as Amina walked through the market, she overheard two young girls talking about her. "She's the bravest person in the village," one of them whispered. "Do you think we could be like her one day?" the other asked. Amina smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility. If her story could inspire even one person to stand up for what was right, then everything she had endured was worth it. The seasons turned, and life went on. The fields yielded their crops, the children grew taller, and the wounds of the past began to heal. Amina knew that the scars would never completely disappear, but she also knew that they were a testament to her strength and survival. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Amina stood on the hill overlooking her fields. Zara was by her side, her small hand tucked into her mother's. "Mama," Zara said softly, "do you think Baba can see us from where he is?" Amina looked down at her daughter, her eyes brimming with tears. "I think he can, my love. And I think he's proud of us, of how far we've come and how strong we've become." Zara smiled, resting her head against her mother's side. Together, they watched the sun disappear, a new chapter of their lives stretching out before them like the endless horizon. Though the path had been fraught with pain and loss, Amina knew that she and Zara had found something precious in its wake, a resilience that could weather any storm, a community that had rediscovered its humanity, and a future filled with hope.